Hello, happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Behind the Design with OPEX coaches, Brandon Gallagher and Daniel Persson. We are here with a new episode for you. The guys are going to walk you through how to build your bench. Going to build a live program to get you to that 250 or maybe even above. So that's exciting. In terms of updates, Brandon and I got to do an episode on his podcast, the BG Perform podcast, last week, and we talked all about marketing. Yes. And it was fun. So I hope you check that episode out. Daniel's traveling, trying to get some sunshine, stepping away from the not so sunny weather in Sweden. And also buried in the middle of quarterfinals with all of his athletes. So he'll probably share an update about that. And I'll just give a quick shout out. I'm doing office hours for Marketing for Fitness Coaches on Wednesday. That link is pretty accessible on all the OPEX and CoachRX channels. If you're interested, it's free. Just jump in. We'll chat marketing. And with that, I'll kick it to you guys. Daniel, you want to share a little bit about what's going on in quarterfinals?
Yeah, so they released the workouts yesterday, and it's fine, a fun time of the year, but it's also kind of you as a CrossFit coach repeat the same thing all over over and over again. Pacing, strategy, and yeah, that conversation, and but it's fun. This is a big part of the season for many athletes, because when they advance from open to quarterfinals, it becomes quite serious to get to the semifinals and then the games. So it's fun, but it's I think it's more on like the later years when I've coached, is because sometimes I find myself thinking that I have the same conversation over and over again over seasons, and before I might be like, we're having this conversation again. I thought that I made it clear when we did this competition, but then I need to reflect on myself and how I communicate and how I work with my athletes, because it falls back on me as a coach. If you keep like thinking about the game planning one way, and I think that I've communicated something and it didn't land, it's on me as a coach. So it's also a good reminder for me that if I feel that they're not prepared in terms of game plan and how they approach workouts, I need to be better at communicating and preparing. So it's nice. You get assessed as a coach.
I love that. And Brandon, you've got Coach Connect this week as well, right? Or today?
Yes, today, a couple hours after this. So got finishing up the first module or the first month of the Coach Connect. We're talking about the coaching crosshairs. So just kind of developing the things that you aim for inside your coaching practice and kind of having a little bit better idea. So just getting towards the end of that today, we should have some specifics from everybody in the group about what makes up their crosshairs. So it'll be good.
That's exciting. You want me to share a screen, or are you guys going to chat
I'll
first?
share a screen. Yeah, I was going to give a little background info before we.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out. I'll duck out. I'll be here if y'all need me.
Cool. All right. So we're going to dive into a little idea me and Daniel were talking about. I think over the next couple of weeks, I want to start to get back into some like technical stuff. We've done a lot of broad speaking topics, and I want to get into some specifics. And I think we're going to start with some progressions, some like movement progressions, or like literally from the point of like, how do I get from point A to like the movement, or how can we actually take a movement and make it better? And I think today is going to be making a movement better with the bench. I think you and I can both agree. I think the bench is one of those movements. Just there's no controversy with the bench. Everyone just loves it. It's just a great movement. There's no bad opinions, or it's not bad for your back. It's not there's not a more efficient pad. It's just a great bench, great way to get big, great way to get strong. I think it's everybody's favorite movement for the most part, or one of the favorite movements. So what Daniel and I thought we would do today is take you through like a live progression. We'll get as far as we can inside the hour. We made a little bit of a avatar to follow. Mostly Daniel's doing on that end. And we're going to use that to create a little, I don't know. We'll see how long the progression actually is. Might be maybe like a month or 2 months, depending on how long it takes us to get through today. And yeah, anything to add to that?
No, just that we'll bill it live, and kind of share how we think about, or when we maybe start designing for a client or designing for an avatar, just share how our thoughts behind it, and also have a discussion like you and me on maybe similarities and differences we have
Yeah.
in how we approach these things. So
Cool. Yeah. I think I tried to share the screen. So, Candace, if you can authorize that for me. But we're going to get into a blank slate here on Coach RX. And just to give a little bit of insight. So, the avatar we're going to be working with today, the goal is to increase the bench overall, right? So, our avatar, client, quote unquote, is a 30-year-old intermediate lifting background, lifts about 3 to 4 times a week. Their current bench is about 200 pounds. Their goal is to get to 225. And the main thing we see in this avatar is they're failing off the chest. I don't know if there was any other detail you had with that, Daniel, in regards to like specifics of it, but think of they're controlling all the way down as soon as they really touch the chest, and they start to go from that transition from the concentric or the eccentric into the concentric. That's when they really start to struggle and get that that main that's their sticking point in the bench press, right? And this is important because I think when we break down a lot of movement patterns, I think we have to figure out a couple things, right? And I think before we start diving into the actual design, looking at someone like this, being 30 years old, having an intermediate background, currently lifting 3 to 4 times a week, and having that big factor be that they fail off the chest right away. Understanding those things helps with a program, right? And I think obviously as a coach who might be listening to this, we want to create something that obviously gets them to 225, but also fits, like we've talked about, fits their life and supports it. And I think a lot of times it's super easy to say, oh yeah, we'll just have them bench twice a week, do something like that, or work on these aspects of the bench. But like a lot of it doesn't work for the average person like that. And when we talk about a 30-year-old who has a not a beginner background, but maybe not an advanced lifting background, there's things we got to watch out for in building a program. So, anything you want to start with, or you want to take that conversation to start?
no, it's just as you said, it's good with the information. For example, failing off the chest, and if this was a client that you or I would start working with, we probably do some kind of assessment to figure
Yeah.
out, like, if you want to, if you want me to help you with the bench press, what's your struggles, and how does it, what does it look like when you try to max out one rep max bench press? If that's so, if it would be safe and they could do a max rep, I'd just have them do it and have a look and see how it goes, and see where kind of where it fails actually. So as a part of an assessment, and like that concept of assessing before you start your design and knowing what to design, or like a good assessment should feed your design in a way that when you run into questions, should I do this or should I do that, in terms of exercise selections, formats, good assessment should feed that process, or help you answer those questions when you make your decisions.
Yeah, I think that's I think the one thing you'll see as we kind of break this down is obviously the main goal is the bench. And I kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were diving into Daniel's program with the deadlift. It's like we want to support the bench. We want to create accessory work that supports the bench. And with the accessory work, that's where realistically the accessory work is where the assessment comes into play, because the accessory work should be supportive of whatever that either main goal is or the main driver of that session is. And if the main driver is the bench, then we want things that are going to make the bench better, or work on things that are going to support the bench if they're a deficit for the individual. And when I say deficit, something that's like getting in the way of them actually being able to fully express strength in a given movement. So even starting from the top, right? And what we're going to do here, I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to work on this like in live, just like I would with any type of client that I've had that I work on through here. So we'll probably just focus on the bench day. Maybe not focus on any other like in the week, but we can kind of discuss that as well. But we'll go upper focus day 1. So with Coach RX, there's a lot of cool features in here. Obviously, there's like a coach's notes section. You can add in any specifics that you want to add in for the client. If there's something you want them to pay attention to or some sort of focus to the day, I won't add anything there right now, but we'll go right to the warm up section. So with something like this, right? So when we talk about a warm up for a bench day, for me, there's a couple things you're going to want to work on. And for me, one of the biggest things is going to be thoracic extension and then shoulder external rotation. Those are going to be 2 like big things to kind of work on right away. But before that, I always like to just throw in some sort of like body elevation or body temperature elevation. And obviously, I definitely want to get your feedback on this, Daniel. But like for me, I just like to do something before any of the movement that's going to get us in a little bit of a elevated heart rate. If you're lucky like me and you sweat easily, break a sweat. If not, at least get you into that leaning towards that idea of like, hey, my body's starting to heat up. I'm starting to hopefully start to sweat, start to loosen things up, because no matter what inside of a warm up, the biggest thing we want to do is raise the body temperature overall. Then we can start to kind of get into the specifics of movement and really start to work on some of the pieces of the puzzle of like, hey, what are we trying to improve on before we hit the deadlift? And I think that's, or the bench press. And I think that's one of the biggest things for the assessment as well, is really understanding what do we need to work on before we get to some of these pieces, right? And in an assessment, you might see, one arm externally rotates more than the other, or we might have deficits at extension of the elbow. We might have deficits at thoracic rotation or whatever it might be. When we see those things, those are clear signs of like, hey, all right, before we get into this main movement, let's make sure we touch on these so we can work on those and make sure that they're we'll say loose just to keep it easy, but like, they're warmed up and primed to be able to complete that main movement. So I'm just going to start this here. Daniel, if there's anything you want to add to that, let me know. Walk. We'll say, sometimes I like to ski, or it depends, but we'll say bike or walk just to make it easy. And then we will get into something I like to do on the bench days are simple movements, right? So I think for me, one of the biggest things I like to see is just going through full range of motion of the shoulder. So to me, there's 4 main movements we're going to worry about. There's protraction, retraction, elevation, and depression of the shoulder, as I was just kind of demoing here. But in those movement patterns, I like to focus on a couple things specifically. I really like the YTWs because for me, those are, I'm just going to write this out here. Those are covering a lot of those different patterns. Obviously, it's very like rear delt focused, but if you're doing it right with the Y pattern, you should be looking to get a little bit of that protraction towards the top as you get out there, and that protraction and elevation. And then the T pattern, we're working on a little bit more retraction. And then with the W, we're working on very much focused on like the depression of the scapula. So retraction and depression, which is a very big aspect of shoulder movement. Because one of the biggest things we want to start to see in anything like a press, whether it's horizontal or vertical, is that movement of the scapula as it kind of wraps around the rib cage. So that's what's going to create that range of motion, or create that ability to really fully express the pressing pattern on, like I said, a bench or an overhead press. But specifically speaking with the bench, I think a lot of the times too, with this movement, right? Like when we talk about keeping the shoulder healthy long term in regards to like a bench, being able to move through these ranges is ideal, right? And I think a lot of times when we start to see people who just bench and don't really work on these 4 main movements of the scap, this is when we oftentimes start to see the elbow pain pop up. Is when we oftentimes start to see areas of stalling in the bench, meaning like stalling of progression. And this is just a very simple way to introduce those 4 main patterns of protraction, retraction, elevation, depression. That can be done really anywhere, sitting, standing. And it can be done in a very, low skill, low stress environment. Then from here, I would do something similar to like a shoulder swimmer, because that's just something I always like to do to work on like full rotation of the shoulder. Do something like 6, we'll do like 8 reps here. And then, there's a couple things we could throw in here. So For me, I would look at something a little bit more focused on the rib cage. I might even throw that in a little bit before here. So like we could say like an open book stretch. We could do what else would we do here? Like a thread the needle type deal. Just something to kind of create some rotation at the thoracic spine here, because I think a lot of times too, when we talk about creating shoulder movement or range of motion of the shoulder, a lot of this does come from thoracic extension a lot of times, and we don't want to rely on thoracic extension, but that extension at the spine is what allows us to really find some of these locked in positions to lift the most amount of weight and stay safe long term. So these are just some ideas I would have. Anything you would throw in regards to like a warm up?
Yeah, it's quite similar how I would approach it. Where and I'd say we'd end up in about the same place, but the way I look at it is, what references do I need to build, or um, what exercises can I do during the warm up so I can uh, create good cues or references within like the main lift, or when we move into the bench press. So like the things you wrote, can I play on that when I maybe write a note for the bench press? I like to do band pull aparts just
Yeah,
to
pull aparts?
make sure that I can say that, like in my comment, remind them that I want you to pinch your shoulder blades together like you do at the end of a band pull apart. If they are able to hang from a rig, I might have them to do some scap pull-ups to have them pushing those shoulder blades down, or and that's just, and adding to that also, this, given that it's a warm-up, I would keep it, I wouldn't progress it, or I'd just have it as a introduction to the main lift. Whereas if I could have about the same structure and exercises as an accessory, but I don't want to fatigue the things that I need to perform a good bench press.
Mhm.
So I usually keep that in mind in the warm up as well, that I want to create good reference, create some good pump, and like warm up the places which is going to be what going to be used in the bench press. But then I don't want to fatigue them too much, because I don't want to go into the bench press with super fatigued shoulder, because I did like lots and lots of scapular work. So that's one thing for me. So I'd say like I probably end up in about the same place with the warm up.
Yeah, and I think also with the warm up too, just because especially when you're chasing strength goals, I think it's really important that you realize like mental capacity is needed as well. And I think too many people take way too long on the warm up. Honestly, I think like just get the body temperature up, get some sort of movement in, whether and be specific. And that's where it starts to like the individualization comes into effect. And I think a lot of times when people follow general programs, a lot of people create these crazy warm-ups because they're just like, well, I'm just going to cover everything because it's got to cover everything for everybody. When I think in reality, most people know what bothers them on most movements, especially like a bench press. You know what it feels like, you know where your struggle points are. And in those struggle points, we can actually start to, again, pick the warm up as the piece that's like, if I know I get towards the bottom and I get this kind of like weird thing going on with my elbow where one kind of flares out, it's like, okay, well, we need to work on a little bit of extension on one side or the other. And we need to throw that into the warm up, and we can kind of really just get body temperature up, work on the couple things that we need, get right into that main movement, right? Because the more time we waste, I wouldn't even say waste, but like the more time we utilize or put towards priming the body is, again, like Daniel said, taking away essentially from the physical effort and then the mental capacity to then complete the session. And I think a lot of times, you know, the more efficient you can be inside the gym, if you can spend an hour in the gym as opposed to 2 hours, like you're going to get more out of that hour, because after a certain bit of time, mentally you're just not there focused. Like it's just impossible to be focused for that amount of time, pushing yourself as hard as you can.
Just want to add to like the
Yeah.
warm up as well. I usually keep an eye on these kind of pieces, especially in the beginning, and especially with intermediate lifter where sometimes I find them find that they've rushed through kind of the first phase of training, which would be motor control. So if you think about like the OPEX, when you progress from motor control to muscular endurance to max contraction, I feel like a lot of people have an underdeveloped motor control, which makes them plateau in their training due to they maybe jumped to programs or um, like templates that they are more for intermediate or advanced, and they've skipped the motor control part, which sometimes end up in getting injured or just plateauing in terms of expression. And then you can see during the warm up sometimes that they really struggle with performing these kind of warm ups, and they have a hard time actually performing, just like pushing the shoulder blades down. And then that gives me some feedback on like the actual level of this client and what we need to work on to then be able to progress in a proper way into muscular endurance and then max contraction.
Yeah, 100%. I think also as a coach, you start to realize when you get in front of enough people, and again, this is why having in-person time is really important, but you start to realize like what the general, consensus is on what people struggle with in regards to some of this stuff. And for me, most people struggle with depression, right? Not actual depression, but like shoulder depression. They struggle with like scapular depression, and they can't actually bring their arms into like this, from this position into this, and engage this fully. So most of the time, if you understand that, you can start to hit the nail right away. Like you don't have to go be like, what do I have to hit first? You get to the point, you focus on the real things that they need, and then you get into like the session from here. So again, this warm up, keep it simple. Like I would probably even, these two movements, like I would pick one of these two movements for the thoracic rotation and extension, and then maybe like one or both of these, the YTWs and the swimmers, and then one of the ones that Daniel suggested as well. I forgot that I usually add a scapular push-up at the end of this, but scapular pull-ups and then band pull-aparts, any of those that you choose to do are great. And I think that's really about it that you need for a warm-up. I'm sure there's other things you could add in, but at that point you're just essentially again, kind of taken away. So then from here, obviously we'll start working on the bench press, right? So I think when we look at the bench press overall, if our goal coming into this is, let's say the individual hits a 200-pound bench press, right? Our goal is obviously to take them about 25 pounds into hitting their goal. So for me and Daniel, obviously, again, we'll kind of go back and forth here, but for me, one of the very early things I like to do, especially in the upper body, and especially if someone's coming to me with like failing off the chest, is a very heavy tempo structure. And what I like to do here is I would do something similar to like we could go like 3-1-X1, or we could go 4-0 or 4-1-X1. And this is just how you write tempo. If you guys are not familiar with tempo, the way that it's usually written is it's read left to right. So that first number is just the eccentric. The second number is going to be the pause at the bottom. The third number, or the X where it's usually written, is just the concentric or the speed on the way up. And then the 1 is the pause at the top. So for example, if we were going to do a bench, you're looking at 3, 2, 1, pause, up, pause. 3, 2, 1, pause, up, pause, just like that. That's what it kind of would look like in regards to actually completing the movement. And one of the reasons I like to do this, especially if someone like our avatar was coming to me with failing off the chest, is really getting them used to controlling that end range of motion, right? That little last half inch that goes from that concentric into the eccentric into the concentric, and really start to get them to feel that. Because I think a lot of the times what happens here, and especially with bench, and I don't know your experience with this, but when I see people bench, oftentimes they're bouncing. And a lot of times you're getting that bounce off the chest, and they're not actually utilizing that muscle or that transition from, like I said, that almost that elastic strength that they can have when they do it the right way. They're bouncing and taking all of that away from them, and then missing out on probably the most important part of the bench, and early on, getting them into a lot of reps too. So I would do something like anywhere from like 3 to 4 sets, and I would look to do something between like probably like 8 to 10 reps early on, um, with like trying to get as much time under tension as possible, just to get them used to it, and then kind of progress from there. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and if we look at this client struggles with strength coming off the chest, I just have that in the back of my mind when I do my design, is that I want to spend time in the position that is the limiting factor, or where they are the weakest within the lift. And then tempo is a great way to make sure that they spend time in that position. Like you
Yeah.
said, if you bounce off the chest, it might be that you lose a bit of tension and you kind of recapture the tension on the way up, and essentially you don't have that much tension in the, it's like with a back squat. If you uh, think about like the strength curve, it peaks at 90 degrees when like knees and hips are the furthest away from the frontal plane, and then you see people bouncing up off like from the bottom, and they kind of skip that part where the strength curve peaks, and it will work until they don't get high enough with the bounce, or they can't bounce past that 90 degrees, because then they'll fail the lift. And I work with a lot of weightlifters where I want them to, I tell them that there's a difference in training. When we back squat for strength, I want control at like the full range of motion. I don't want any bouncing, because I want to practice, or I want to use the full range of motion and use where the stimulus from where the strength curve peaks. But when we're at a meet and you going for a 1 rep max, you do whatever you can to just get that number on the board. So it's a big difference. And same with the bench. Like, think about it as, I want to spend time in the position where I'm weak, because that's where you have a lot to gain.
Yeah. Yep. And I think, along with this, obviously with a heavy tempo pattern like this, like kind of Daniel mentioned, with that transition of like, the muscular endurance into, a more like normal strength pattern, we would progress this week to week. We would look to kind of use this tempo to drive the stimulus. And that's why I love tempo as well early on, is because you can really tell someone what they, what they have to do without being there or telling them. You know what I mean? Like, the tempo speaks itself. If this guy can bench 200 pounds, realistically, with a 4, 5, 6 second, 7 second tempo, right, in total. And when we talk about total time of the tempo, you're obviously adding in each of the seconds that it would take to complete this. So we have about a 7 second like in total tempo, and then we'd multiply that by like obviously the amount of reps, and that would give you the total time under tension. But with a 4 second eccentric, like, you're not going to be able to go crazy on the bench. And that's one of my favorite things about tempo, is that it really humbles people, because you start to get these individuals who are like, yeah, I can bench 225, I can bench 245, 55, whatever. But it's like, cool, let's see what you can bench with time under tension, and not just like slamming the weight off your chest and going through, a half of an actual rep. And you're starting to see guys who can bench 225 getting down to like 135 and struggling and feeling it. And you'll get very fatigued very fast, because your body and the muscles are not used to that amount of load under tension. So keeping an aggressive tempo like this, with an aggressive rep range early on, fatigues the muscle, allows you real, like, again, time under tension is not just for the muscle, it's also time for like technical failure as well, and give your body an opportunity to actually like feel the pattern. And I think a lot of times what we miss out on with something like a bench is the reps are short, right? And you're really not doing that long of a repetition. And it's really hard to kind of get into a flow or feel it when your your sets are only 15 to 30 seconds at most. So giving yourself close to a minute of total time under tension here, that's a lot of time that you're going to have to feel the bench, feel what's wrong. You're going to start to feel things that you haven't felt before, in regards to like what actually goes first. What is it? Is it again, is it thoracic extension? Is it shoulder external rotation? Is it tricep strength? Like whatever it might be, you're going to start to feel that a lot with 60 to 70 seconds of time under tension. And then basically what we would do from here is kind of bring this tempo down or bring these reps down as the weeks go on. But anything you want to add to this first movement here for this like first week?
No.
Cool. So obviously underneath this, like if you are writing, I usually like to add just a couple little notes, kind of like Daniel mentioned as well. Just a couple little things that are specific to the client. It might be like focus on 5 points of contact, something along those lines, but definitely make sure to update it because I always forget. But all right. So then when we dive into a second movement, right? For me, there's a couple ways that I would take this. If the bench, obviously early on, is heavy tempo, sometimes I would consider throwing in like a superset here that's a little bit lighter. Most of the time, I'd probably leave the tempo by itself just because it is a lot early on. And it's very fatiguing early on. So I'd probably go to like a B situation here in regards to like the next movement. And there's a couple ways. So we could kind of create a day depending on the amount of days per week. If what would we say, like 4 days a week, this guy would probably train. So if we
One
said
thing before we move forward, I think it's like worth reminding that like if the bench is a priority, obviously we start with the bench press as our first exercise.
Yes. Sorry,
after the warm up, and it's on the first day in the week. So I think it sounds so simple, but I see a lot of programs sometimes where it might be an outspoken like deadlift focus or back squat or whatever the exercise is, and it's not, when you look at it through the flow, it's not prioritized in a way that it comes first in the first day, and it's such a simple way yet effective way to get your clients to or like in the design prioritize that movement. And it's sometimes when people get stuck or coaches get stuck when they are supposed to or sometimes I see coaches get stuck when they're about to write a program and don't know where to start. It's like, get your list of priorities from that client, start putting it in that order, and you'll get going. So there's no coincidence that it's the first day, first exercise is the bench press.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things too to kind of consider, like when you learn, like you want kind of these high skill, high output movements to be very early on, right? And the same thing, it's almost like this. You're looking at that same like I guess framework inside of like the smaller pieces, right? So like you look at that in the week, the highest, hardest, most important movement is going to be first, and then as the week goes on, we might work on things that are a little less mentally demanding, a little less physically demanding, a little bit more. It might be a strength for us, right? And then you take that as the macro, then you look that a little bit deeper into the workout, right? And then the workout's going to be most important movement first, and then a little bit less intense, a little bit less mentally draining, a little bit less output based. And then you look at that inside of the actual, exercises themselves. The first set, we're going to build and we're going to, kind of build on that intensity as we work through. And then the accessory movements are going to kind of help us there. So it's that same framework of like, get going, most important piece, then we start to kind of fill in the blanks of everything that we need to support with it. So very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So what I was going to say next is we can do a couple different things. If we're working out 3 to 4 times a week, we could make this very focused on the chest and kind of make this a very aggressive, like pushing day. We also could make this a little bit of a mix, like an upper push pull sort of day. In your experience, would you make this just a pressing day, or would you make this a push pull kind of day?
I usually, when I do my design, think about like I go with one pattern first, and then I'm not that tied to days. So I'd think about the bench press like, do I want to do the bench press again on a second day, or do I want to do let's say a day where I do more like pressing accessories with the dumbbell bench press. And that's so that's usually how I design. I would just like, let's say I want to have a second day of bench pressing, I would just drop that in a new session. And I think it's different how coaches approach this. What I usually do, I write the patterns and program more in a horizontal way than sessions, if that makes sense. But I would definitely go with after the bench press. I'd probably go with something that think about like the accessory I want to do. If I probably go with a pulling exercise afterwards, and I probably would not superset it just for the sake of having it as a high priority standalone exercise. So that it will probably follow. The B would be maybe pull up, lat pull down, some kind of pulling exercise going after this.
Yeah, I was actually, so my head was going to go to like a 3-point row.
Yep.
So like a 3-point row, that like a very specific setup for the 3-point row. But that was kind of where my head was going. So there's 2 different ways I usually think about this. The first one is like you said, and I'm glad you mentioned it. If you're going to bench multiple times during the week, so like something like this, if you were going to try to help someone get into a better bench, there's 2 ways you kind of go about it. You could specifically have one focus day on the bench like this, and it could be all chest, or you could kind of have a very specific tempo day, and then what I would consider like a more dynamic day. And with that dynamic day, we could work on a lot more. Like this is essentially very eccentric focused, this session right here, because we're working on the 4-second eccentric with the bench. So a lot of that tension or that demand is going to come from controlling the weight on the way down. What we could do on another day is work on very concentric heavy press. It might be like a pin press, or it might be, a board press. It could be some sort of focus on, not really controlling from here, but pressing from here and loading in that pattern. So we're working on the other end of that bench press. But for like a general, that would be a little bit more of an advanced skill. With someone who's a little bit more intermediate, I'd probably keep this, like Daniel said, some sort of 3-point row, maybe going like 3 sets, focusing like, again, 8 to 10 reps per side, and then, resting 2 to 3 minutes in between, or even rest as needed. To be honest, like a lot of this stuff, the 2 to 3 minutes is usually enough rest for most people, but especially early on in these tempos, resting as needed could also be an option, because you don't want them to get too tired too soon and then miss out on the actual benefits of the lift. But yeah, so a 3-point lift, like Daniel said, a lat pull down. We could probably go, what else? Probably go like, trying to think. Single arm, again, like a single arm lat pull down, some sort of single arm seated row, something like that. Something that's a little bit more focused on that position. Anything else to add to that?
No, and it's I think it's nice with following the bench press, which is a big heavy exercise. Sometimes it's nice to go with a single arm just for getting the load down, and it's not as taxing because you're not going to use, like, since it's unilateral or like a one-side exercise, the absolute weight is going to be less. So it's quite nice to follow the bench press with that. And also depends, like sometimes we can lay out this session and we will see if with the full design you obviously need to go back and review things. So it's nice to not, also just a tip for coaches to not get stuck in a specific exercise. If you know you want a pulling exercise, just put a pulling exercise out there, and then when you review it or go over it, you might find that I might want to have the 3-4-point bend over row in another day, or I want to move it. But it's really nice to just get think about patterns and what kind of exercises and structure do I need, and then you can go over it and just fine tune it later. So I think it's really nice with that one.
Cool. For me, next, what I would do is a cable pec fly, I guess, or like a cable fly machine. Now, reason why I would do this is, do I have cable machine on here? Maybe machine cable fly. let's see, what do I have a name down here? Chest fly
Chest
machine.
fly.
There we go. Yeah. So when we talk about this is something I talked about with Daniel a lot and his program, but we want to be efficient in a lot of these things. And a lot of times you'll see people who just want to get better at a movement and they'll just overload a pattern. And that works early on, but what it does is it adds a lot of unnecessary volume. It adds a lot of kind of very uh, overloading certain things, just kind of a lot of redundancy, a lot of wasted time in the gym. So if you look at the bench press and then you look at the chest fly machine, there's two main things I want you guys to kind of pay attention to here. The first one with the bench press is obviously very it's focused on really loading the chest, right? But it's a very kind of fixed position that we're working through with the shoulder. Now, what I really enjoy about the chest fly machine is that if we're doing it right, we're really starting to work on this rotation of the or this movement of the scap around the rib cage with because ideally when we're doing a fly, we want to start to create this retraction as we're bringing our arms back at the bottom, or what I would consider like the bottom of the movement, so we can get a nice fully lengthened position here at the chest. And then as we're coming back through with the fly, we want to start to kind of just focus on creating that protraction at the end. So we're bringing our hands out and forward for this movement and really starting to create this fully shortened position of the chest, which you're not really going to see in a lot of pressing movements. But this is a really efficient way that doesn't take a lot out of the individual. And you can kind of really, again, focus on movement over load, because a lot of times early on, they don't need a lot of load. The load comes later down the line once a lot of these things are fixed and kind of touched upon. But with something like this, working on even a lower tempo with a lot of reps, so 3 sets, looking at like 12 to 15 reps here, keeping the weight low enough that they can work through that full range of motion of the scapula really allows them to again create a different stimulus on the chest, but also work through this fully lengthened and fully shortened position of the pec, which again is really hard to do outside of like a chest fly. Really, with the bench, we're just kind of working on the normal mid range of motion, but we're not getting like full extension, and we're also not getting full protraction because of the fixed position of the bar. So when we use a chest fly machine, if you use cables, that's a little bit better. We have a really nice pec fly or chest fly machine at my gym that allows me to kind of like shift my hands and keep it in a really nice position, so I can the actual handles like swivel a little bit, so I can finish with a little bit more of like a protracted position at the end, which I really enjoy. But that's something I would throw in after this that would then allow us to kind of fully fatigue the chest in the proper way without just doing like, bench press and then into dumbbell bench press. It's like we're working on that regular bench press with the heavy tempo, and then we're doing a lot of reps working on that protraction, retraction, that fully lengthened, fully shortened position of the chest. And then that would allow us to obviously, give enough of a stimulus to the chest where we're still getting like a little bit of the hypertrophy. This might be a little bit of a lot of volume early on, but with these tempos, they shouldn't be able to push the weight too much that it's really going to affect them. And they're going to get a lot of stimulus from this early on, and a lot of what I would call like foundation building to get them ready for what's going to come later in the program.
When you go, so if we have pressing and pulling in this session, do you prefer go like alternating the pattern between exercises like this one, or go like do all the pressing and then do the pulling? Do you have a preference like pattern wise?
I don't normally. It just depends. Like personally, I would probably do it this way, just because it feels nice to be able to go like, all right, do the bench and then a nice pull movement and then a press and then a pull movement. That would probably be how I would organize it if I was going to do this entirely. And then I would probably do some sort of, again, like pull-ish type movement. It might not be like another specific row, but something where it's like, rear delt focused or rhomboid focused, something along those lines as the last movement, which we'll get to. But I mean, either way, it just kind of depends. Like you wouldn't be wrong, in my opinion, if you did like the bench into the chest fly machine either, and then save the row for the last two. It just kind of depends on, I guess, also how the gym's set up, what makes most sense for the actual equipment setup. Because I know sometimes with some gyms, it might make more sense to do the bench and then bring a dumbbell over and just use that instead of having to like use the bench and then go to the machine and then get the bench again. Whatever works. I don't think there's a direct best way to do it. I think if we were going to talk about efficiency, probably makes more sense to do like the bench and then the chest fly machine and then the rows at the end. But I don't think there's any specific ways.
I think it like depends on what you want to get out of the exercise. You can even you can even argue for if you want to have the bench press really if you want the pecs to be really the limiting factor in your bench press, you could even argue to go chest fly machine then bench press for maybe more experienced clients that where you know that they're not going to break down technically. It's just you want to have a like chest emphasized bench day. You could even like go with chest fly and then into the bench press. I think it's the order of the exercise selection is so much dependent on, as you said, logistics, what's the intent of the exercise, and there's no right or wrong order. You just need to know why they're in the given order that you've put them. And I think it's useful to not only think about exercise selection, but also order of exercises in that way. And it could be like, I know some of my clients, I do maybe bench press and then the chest fly just for the reason that I know that they will be good and warmed up and can jump into the chest fly machine almost like straight away after they've bench pressed. But would they be able to push a bit more intensity if I placed the pulling exercise in between? Yeah, probably. So I think it depends so much on all the things you have to weigh in when you do your design.
Yeah, and I think I was going to say something that you said. Dang. So the other thing too with this is like Daniel said, this could get moved up to, and luckily you can do this in Coach RX, but you could move this up to that movement before. The only reason I wouldn't do it in something like this is because our goal is obviously to improve the bench overall, which if we're going to improve the bench, we want to be fully focused on being able to like challenge that in the first movement. Yeah. But like Daniel said, in a hypertrophy setting, like if it was like, hey, I'm really trying to fatigue the chest before working on this pattern, it makes a lot of sense to hit that chest fly first. And especially, if you wanted to kind of streamline your warm up, like let's say you were short on time and you just had like 45 minutes, like I got to get right into the workout. You wouldn't be wrong with hopping on a bike for a couple minutes, throwing this chest fly machine right before the bench press and using that as kind of your warm up for the pattern, and then getting into the bench press and working on it fully, because you're essentially priming that same pattern in a little bit more of an aggressive set or setting with the pec, and then going right into the bench press. So I don't know if that's something you do as well, but that could be considered like a nice little warm up piece for it.
Yeah, I have a recent example with I have one client that struggled with, we wanted a tricep emphasis on the dips, and then he had some trouble. He just felt it in the chest, and then we had him do like one set tricep push down before he went into the dip, and then it made a huge difference, because then we really made sure that the tricep was the limiting factor in that movement and in that pattern, and that made a huge difference for feeling and his muscle connection, or whatever you want to call it. But what the big thing that we did was making sure that the tricep is the limiting factor, and that would be kind of the same case if you really wanted the chest to be the limited factor within the bench press, and you want to have that emphasis. You can achieve that with exercise, like the order of exercise selection.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. And then so for this last movement, just so we can start to get to express or progressing this. So there's a couple ways I would usually go with this. I would either go with like a single movement, or sometimes I'll go with like an accessory circuit. Something focused on the tricep here. just because obviously it's a little bit towards the end. The triceps going to be pretty fatigued by this point after the bench. But I would go with a little bit more, focus. We could go something like 3 sets, focusing on some sort of extension. Let me see here. So we could go 10 to 12 reps, cable tricep, cable. I would probably go cable overhead tricep extension here to get the fully lengthened position. And then we can go into some sort of go 10 to 12 reps, incline, dumbbell bicep curl. So this is something that I would kind of consider as an ending piece that'd be really good for this sort of day. We work on the chest with the tempo, and this is like a very specific day. Like there might be some other things depending on the individual, but like a very heavy tempo day with the bench. So just starting that off here on this piece. Then we're moving into a very the version that I would do of this row is where we're kind of setting our forearm up on the bench, and then we're getting almost like an anti-rotation aspect as well while we're doing that single arm row. Then we got the chest fly machine working on the fully lengthened and fully shortened position. And then we have the bench press that already worked on that medium range of motion for the tricep. We're working into a overhead tricep extension to kind of work on that fully lengthened position of the tricep, and then working on a fully lengthened position of the bicep, since we already worked on that medium range with the 3-point row as well. Again, this is a very specific way to avoid redundancy in the program and also work very efficiently on training the bicep, the chest, and the tricep very efficiently. You're hitting the full range of motion of each of those muscles and giving yourself enough of a buffer to get in, get out, and not be in there all day, right? Anything to add to that? Or thoughts on that last piece?
Looks good.
Cool. So
you can't go wrong with arms. So
yeah, of course, I know. So we're gonna get Daniel 30-inch biceps in this next 8 weeks.
exactly.
So if we're gonna progress this right now, the rest of this week would probably be again filling in some lower body stuff, filling in a little bit more vertical pulling here, and pressing, just trying to create a little bit of again, supporting movement to this and still keeping the rest of the body healthy. But if we were going to take this movement and we were going to progress this to week 2, my thought would be warm-up's going to be relatively the same. From here, we could either, again, and I don't know how you usually go about this, Daniel, but usually for this, we could adjust tempo. This might be a couple weeks. Sometimes it might be 1 or 2 weeks that we'll leave it, but it's something as simple as just bringing this tempo down. Allows us to start to create more load on the movement as opposed to less load with the higher tempo. With this, we could start to increase load or add weight. Usually what I would do here is some sort of like week 1 would be like build to a heavy weight or build to a tough set, and then build to a moderate set. Like focus on range of motion. I'm just going to put this to shorten it for today. So then here would be taking the heaviest set from last week and then using that across all sets this week. Same thing here, just like this. And then this would and there's a couple ways, like I said, if this was just to kind of show you what a progression would look like for the bench, we could either go less tempo, we could go less reps, we could go less tempo and less reps, kind of working our way down from this 4-second tempo into something that would look like a 1-1x1 tempo, where we're kind of really starting to just work through a nice range of motion that's controlled in the bench press and starting to bring the reps down with it, so we can start to kind of increase that load over time. After this would I'd probably be in this sort of tempo phase for a month or 2, depending on how the individual progresses from there. And then we would start to get into some anywhere from like 2 to 5 reps, really starting to work on, some general or, fundamental powerlifting principles where we're really overloading, using progressive overload, starting to kind of work through specific percentage ranges and things like that. And that's when we start to see like the biggest bump in weight. And I think one of the biggest things here is you setting yourself up for success with heavy tempos and rep controlling. Then from here, we're kind of building on these movements across the weeks, where we're using that heavy set across for each of these sets while still working on focusing on that range of motion and still keeping this very efficient in regards to the patterns. So we're not doing too much on the bicep. We're not doing too much on the pec. We're not doing too much on the tricep. We're introducing efficient output while still keeping us safe from just basically overdoing it and just kind of being repeated efforts as we go through. Any thoughts on this or input?
You can even, I thought on the bench press, you could even progress it with, like, take the tempo. So you go from 3 seconds to 2 seconds, and then move that second to 2 seconds pause at
Yeah.
the bottom. So if we think about being weak off the chest, that would progress the client to spend even more time with the same total time under tension and the same amount of reps and rest. Just moving where they spend time within the movement is also a good way to progress it. And then you could keep the weight the same from last week, just that we move or spend more time in the bottom position of the bench press. But there's loads of ways of progress it, and it's useful to just make sure to have a plan, like how am I going to progress this over, if the block is 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever the time frame is for your block. Think out like the steps and what's the intent and how am I going to progress this. And what I do really like that you do and is kind of using that first session as a training, but also an assessment of the weights you're going to use in the coming weeks. And I've stole that for how I do my design recently, to have that first week as kind of a benchmark or assessment and help guide the clients in what weights to use the coming weeks. So
I think it just helps because that's like think about it, when you're introducing a new movement to somebody, you know, it long term, the goal is always still the same, right? And that's why with accessory work, I don't get so focused on the numbers of accessory work. Like I don't get so focused on like always showing progression of like the numbers got to move forward every single time, because it changes week to week. And as long as that main thing, like to me, if this bench is moving up and that's what the goal is, or the deadlift's moving up or the squat, everything else can change, because it's just like we can change angles, we could change tempos, we could change pattern, we could change so much. And the accessory work, I don't get too caught up on the number. And that's why I go week to week, because I always get some people who come to me like, hey, can you recommend weights for me for like some of the accessory movements? And I'm like, I could, but like I would almost be doing you a disservice, because I'm trying to tell you like what the expectation is of doing something, right? And like if the goal is just to get better at a given thing or have like a specific outcome, then focusing on the accessory work, overall having like a specific progression to it in regards to the weight doesn't always make sense to me. And and why I use it is because week to week it changes. You might see something that feels really good week one, and we change a little thing, and your weight goes from a 50-pound dumbbell down to a 30-pound dumbbell. And it's like, well, we just did this 3-point row 3 weeks ago or a month ago for a month, and I got up to 50, and now I can't do 50, so that doesn't make sense. It's like, well, that's why we're changing this, and that's why I want you to just set that tough set or that heavy set, and then you can utilize that across the sets, so you can just get more volume. And that's another way to get like an idea of like progressive overload, is this idea of like adding weight. There's also like a skill overload where it's like, hey, all right, well, we worked up to that first week, that heavy set. Now for weeks 2 and 3, we're just going to take that same weight and just get better at it, and just do more reps and more volume and more adaptation. And it makes it easy because you're not really worrying about that. You're just doing more sets and reps at that same weight and just focusing on the skill, as opposed to having to, progress and change and change and change and change and take everything away. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I went on a little tangent there, but
it's just, it helps people train hard. Like if you have a target, you have something you're working towards, and you might fall short of 1 or 2 reps, but it's on the accessory work. You want to like do every rep with intent, do the most out of each weight, but also, as you said, the priority is that the main lift is progressing, because it's also the most fair evaluation. Since it's a high priority, it will be first in the week, first in the session. So that's says that we can read the most out of that exercise. So
yeah. And then from here, essentially, I would probably take this for about 4 to 6 weeks, like Daniel kind of mentioned, and I'd see where we're at. If I saw a good enough progression that I thought we were like running smooth from here, I'd probably start to transition into a little bit more of, like I said, a traditional powerlifting rep and set scheme for this, for the bench press. Then we can start to get a little bit more creative with some of the movements we would do, because as we start to get through this first phase of the, what we would call like the muscular endurance phase, we're starting to see the cracks in the foundation. We're starting to see like what goes first, what's the struggle, where are we super sore. Like if we do this for the most part, like most people probably aren't going to be super sore in their chest. They're probably going to be super sore in their triceps. They're probably going to be super sore in their shoulders. And I tend to get a lot of people who would like do this sort of setup on the bench, and like my triceps are screaming, like they're so sore. And that's another thing to kind of take into account, is like when you do these sorts of time under tension movements, you're going to see what's really driving the movement, right? And you're going to start to see what's giving out first, what's starting to fault first. And that's when we start to adjust some of this accessory work later on, where it's like, okay, cool. We're starting to see the tricep is lagging in this bench press, and that might be what's holding you back. So maybe instead of adding, a very specific like overhead tricep extension here, maybe we're going like a J&M press, or maybe we're going with a tricep push down, or maybe we're focusing on something that's a little bit more output based for the tricep as opposed to positionally based with the tricep. And we can start to really focus in on the accessory work. And that's, again, when we start to get even further, because again, as much as I love assessments, sometimes assessments don't always tell the full story until you just get under load and start to move. And then you actually start to see what pops up as problems, what the limiting factors are, because sometimes, specific patterns like an overhead squat or, a toe touch or something like that, they look fine when there's not stress on the system. But then when there's stress on the system, you start to actually see like, oh, okay, well, they're getting this position with their hip, and they're shifting when they add, 40 pounds instead of 30 pounds, or when they bend over with 30 pounds, they can't touch their toes. But then when they're bending over by themselves, that's like, it looks perfect. So that's another really important part as we progress. And then from here, like I said, we go into some traditional, and I wish we had more time because we could dive into this a little bit more. Maybe we can do like a part 2 or something. So we can talk a little bit more about what it would actually look like after this initial phase, or like this first month or so. Because I think there's a lot more that goes into this, and then that hopefully would kind of set us up. Like this would be a really good setup to get us from a 200-pound bench press to a 225-pound bench press. And this would be a really good foundation to then get us to that next level. So
agree.
Beautiful. Anything to add on top of that, or no?
No, I think we need to do part 2 for
maybe that's what we do next week. Dive into the rest of this.
Yeah, because it's also, I just want to say, like, with this one, it's I think we get caught up in at least the trend in we have CrossFit, we have hybrid training, it's sometimes like people are scared to have one goal and get after it, but sometimes that's the best way to get overall in shape. And just like one thing, if I go to myself, I've been chasing 3x bodyweight deadlift. I'm in many aspects the most fit I've been in years and years. So it's a highly recommended tip. Set a goal. You won't be that specialized that there will come loads of benefits from you chasing a goal and trying to get strong enough or fast enough to achieve that. So yeah, it's
actually, I want to add one more thing in here too, that I want you guys to focus on too. Like a day like this, only 4 movements, right? 5 movements. That's it. Something like this is like, it's 5 movements, 3 main movements, and then 2 accessory movements. Or well, technically 4 accessory movements, but there's like a circuit. That's all you really need. Like if you're really focusing on this stuff and giving it 100%, you are going to be dead after this session. Like with the tempos, with the high rep sets, focusing on the protraction and retraction, focusing on the positional setup of like the accessory work. This is literally all you need to start to get strong and progress. You don't need 2-hour workouts. You don't need 90-minute workouts. Like, just if it takes 90 minutes to complete this, that's fine. But if you're doing 90 minutes worth of movement, you're probably missing the point here, and you're probably missing some intention on the movement. And something like this, and why I like this setup as well, is because it's simple, it's effective, and it just focuses on the goal. And there's nothing else to it. And this is so easy to progress over the next month or so, because this isn't like so complex. It's just like, hey, cool, we're focusing on the tempo, we're focusing on a pull, we're focusing on the protraction, retraction, and then we have some specific accessory work. That makes it so easy on the coach's perspective to say, hey, now I can really see what's going on here, right? This is why when we were talking about last week, where it's like, if you're doing like or maybe a couple weeks ago, if you're doing these super complex movements, it's so hard to actually see what's going on because there's so many layers to it, right? Like if you're just doing a bench press at a tempo, you can start to see what goes wrong. There's nothing else to it. If you're doing a single leg glute bridge bench press from a bench, it's like, well, yeah, there could be 6 things going on, but like I can't really see because you're doing 6 of them at once. You know what I mean? So keep it simple, keep it effective, keep it efficient, and then you're going to be able to progress a program effectively over the course of 2, 3, 4, 6, 12 months and get someone where they want to be. So that'll be my last nail in the coffin for this episode.
Boom.
Whoop, sorry about that, Daniel. I didn't mean to knock you out of frame. That was awesome, guys.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Cool. Well, we will catch you back next week with a new episode. As always, the comments are open, so drop them here. And the coaches' Instagrams are linked in the description, so feel free to reach out to them if you have any questions or want to chat further about this topic or any coaching topics. And yeah, we'll catch you next week. Have a great rest of your day.
Peace out.